Hello, everyone. Welcome to International Open Seminar on John Deely, a tribute on his 5th anniversary of his passing. And we are here having our last lecture and the closing ceremony for this year-long event. In regards to two of our esteemed guests, Professor Dr. Saif and Dr. Minard, we would like your kindness to have a 1 minute silence on the passing of their relatives. So would you join me in prayers for this 1 minute, please? Thank you. And now back to our main lecture today. This is our last lecture prior to closing ceremony for this spectacular event that we had during the 2022 in remembering and celebrating the figure and authority of John Deely. Today with us, we have Professor Banzelão Teixeira, who will have the main speech, followed by two guest commentators, Cristina Greco and John Hittinger. So without further ado, I would like to have a few words, a brief introduction of Professor Banzelão and his intellectual work, a brief profile for the sake of audience. Professor Banzelão has been a guest in our events before, and we have introduced him earlier. Just a few words today for the, to refresh our memory. So Professor Banzelão obtained a master's degree in philosophy in 2001 from Divyadan, Lyceum Institute of Philosophy in India. In 2016, he completed his doctorate in philosophy from the Salesian Pontifical University established in Rome on the topic of the Tractatus de Signis of John Poinsot and the New Realism, a study of John Deely's proposal. Presently, he is the director of Divyadan, Salesian Institute of Philosophy, where he holds the chair of philosophy of communication. He is also the editor of Divyadan, Journal of Philosophy and Education. He's interested in hermeneutics, communication, semiotics, and ecology. He recently has published in the field of semiotics, and here to mention just a few of his titles: The Notion of Sign in Augustine, Aquinas, Poinsot, 2016, Semiotic Revolution in the 4th Century, Assessing Augustine's Contribution to the Ancient Discussion of the Sign, published in 2017, 21st Century Realism, John Deely's Recovery of Poinsot Doctrine of Signs, published in 2018. The supra-subjective nature of relation, John Deely's semiotic response to the modern impasse, published in 2018. This is also the title of one of his key lectures here earlier last year. The semiotic proposal of John Deely of John Poinsot, a brief overview of Tractatus de Signs, published in 2018, and the role of signs within cognition, a semiotic view of the process of knowing, published 2020. I'm not sure if Professor Banzelão is here with us right at this moment, but we have his lecture recorded. So Robert, I guess we can stream the lecture, and he will join us for the commentary later. Thank you.
It is my honor to make this presentation at the conclusion of the year-long International Open Seminar on Semiotics, a tribute to John Deely on the 5th anniversary of his passing. On this day, We mourn the untimely passing away of John Deely on 7th January 2017 and offer our condolences to his family, relatives and friends. But we have also demonstrated our will to continue his rich legacy in semiotics. I wish to congratulate the organizers of this international seminar and express my gratitude for inviting me to be part of it. The title of John Deely's 1981 essay, Cognition from a Semiotic Point of View, encouraged me to look at cognition from a semiotic perspective, that is, to explore the action of science within the process of knowing. Though Deely's essay takes a historical approach, his later writings provide important milestones that help us arrive at a sound doctrinal position regarding cognition and the indispensable role that science plays in this process. Cognition includes all processes of awareness that build up our experience. A semiotic point of view is concerned with the action of science. Thus, when we speak of cognition from a semiotic point of view, we focus on the role or action of science within the entire process of cognition, from its simple beginnings in sensation to its culmination in animal perception and human understanding. Deely claims that a semiotic perspective is necessary to attain a sound understanding of the process of cognition. Every biological organism has a species-specific distinct mode of awareness. In humans, the process of awareness unfolds at three levels: sensation, perception and understanding. Sensation is that dimension of awareness through which the brute interaction between the cognizing animal and the physical environment gives rise to nascent awareness, which forms the basis of perceptions within the organism. Perception is common to human beings as well as other animals. It involves the interpretation of objects of sense according to the basic needs of the organism. Understanding, instead, is distinct to human beings and involves the grasping of the true nature of things as they exist in themselves. This presentation begins with an overview of the role of science in the process of knowing, then examines the action of science within animal perception, and finally looks at their indispensable role in human understanding. Let us begin with a sketch of the role of science in the cognitive process. From our daily experience, we know that we can clearly distinguish between being in the physical presence of someone and thinking about the person in his or her absence. For example, last Christmas, I met an old friend after almost 20 years and we enjoyed a good meal together. Today, I can only think about that friend and recall the wonderful moments spent together. In both cases, I am aware of an object that is other than myself. The difference is that while in the former case, I could see, hear and touch the object as a thing existing in itself, as well as objectively, that means in my thinking process. But in the latter case, there is nothing of the object that can be physically sensed here and now. In this context, we are compelled to ask ourselves, how is it possible that what exists subjectively should also exist objectively and publicly? What do we really mean by objective existence? How does our knowledge come about? As an initial response, we can say that the ability to be aware of an object, whether that object is physically present or absent, requires that the object be present to us on the basis of other representations. To grasp how this happens, we need to understand two important elements. First, a specific relation of the object to the knower, namely as the terminus of a relation of apprehension. And second, the suprasubjective nature of sign relations. According to Deely's semiotic proposal, every relation has three constitutive elements: a foundation, a terminus, and the relation itself as suprasubjective. Both foundation and terminus depend upon the relation itself for their being as fundament and as terminus. Minus the relation, there is no fundament as fundament and no terminus as terminus. Now, in the order of ens reale, if relation transforms the subjectively existing characteristics of individuals into further being foundation or terminus of relations, could this be also possible in the order of ens rationis? By way of clarification of terminology, for Deely, ens reale refers to a mind-independent being or physical being, which truly exists in the world irrespective of our knowledge of its existence. In contrast, ens rationis, also known as being of reason or mind-dependent being, refers to that which depends entirely on the mind for its existence. Deely claims that when a physical thing enters into a cognitive relationship, it becomes at that moment an object besides being a thing. How does this happen? Things become initially objectified in sensation. They are interpreted in perception according to the life needs of animals. And further, in human understanding, there is the possibility of knowing things as they are in themselves. Signs play an indispensable role in this process. The formal rationale of the sign consists of triadic relations, where the sign vehicle signifies something other than itself to a cognitive power. The singularity of a sign relation consists in its ability to move between the otherwise opposed orders of ens reale and ens rationis, which makes possible the interweave of objectivity with physical reality in the life world of animals. Also, through sensation, the dyadic relations of physical interaction are subsumed into triadic relations whereby one thing comes to stand for something other than itself, to or for an animal aware of the object signified. The modern philosophers, according to Deely, failed to grasp the point that the singularity of relations consists in its ability to move with its essence unchanged between the two orders of ens reale and ens rationis, so as to form a common bond and interweave between what animals imagine and desire and what the world can provide. Objectivity presupposes the possibility of the action of signs. We can therefore distinguish between formal signs and instrumental signs on the basis of the nature of the sign vehicle. In a formal sign, the sign vehicle is a psychological state within the knowing subject, while in an instrumental sign, the sign vehicle is a material reality lying outside our subjectivity. Now the question is, which comes first within objectivity? Modern philosophers claimed that the formal sign initiates the process of signification, and on this depends the further transformation of the object into an instrumental sign. However, Poinsot alerted us to the danger of considering formal signs as the starting point of signification, a trap to which Descartes and the rest of the modern philosophers readily succumbed. Deely offers an insight into the element of relation that is prior to formal signs, and I quote Deely: "For prior to formal signs, there are in external sensation already a first level of instrumental signs which have their being triadically in no other way than as signifying, even though they come into being dependently upon the dyadic interaction between the animal body and its physical surroundings, and so reduce neither to material realities on the side of the environment nor to representational realities on the side of the organism sensing. So, the more commonly recognized instrumental signs which are posterior to formal signs and succeed to reveal some of the physical world in its independence of the interaction between the animal body and the surrounding stimulants of that body's sensations, are in fact not even second level instruments of signification, but rather third level. Just as formal signs are a second level of signification called into being by the first level of instrumental signs of proper and common sensibles, so the third level of signification, where perceived material objects themselves become signs within experience of what to expect within the physical environment itself, could not come to be except on the basis of the formal signs which objects as capable of expressing interpretations presuppose. End of the quote. The above quote from Deely indicates how formal signs presuppose a certain type of instrumental signs. Thus, we can discern three levels of signification in every act of sense perception. The first level of signification consists of instrumental signs of sense. The second level comprises of mental other representations which organize the complex of sense data into objects for animal interaction. Finally, at the third level of signification, the significates further become signs in the ongoing experience of animals. Some contemporary realists focus largely on the dependency of instrumental signs on formal signs. Failing to realize that it is precisely the involvement of concepts that makes idealism in the modern sense possible, they claimed that concepts are that by which, that is the id quo, we know things, including things that become signs, whereas things are that which, id quod, concepts make known. According to Deely, this is an oversimplification of the matter. Instead, he sees concepts as that on the basis of which we know objects. The difference is subtle but important, and I quote Deely here. Concepts are that on the basis of which we know objects constructed and interpreted as this or that in the order of fact or fiction, and what makes these objects partially include things existing independently of being known when they do, is not at all the concepts as concepts, but the concepts as themselves initially formed on the basis of perceptions deriving ultimately from sensations as revealing characteristics of body to the casual interactions resulting in relations among proper and common sensibles which preclude so much as the possibility of an involvement of ens rationis in the preliminary objectification. Just as sense selects but does not interpret, so concepts alike at the perceptual and the intellectual levels have as their very first function the interpretation of what the outer senses have selectively introduced into awareness. The nascent objectivity of sensation becomes the perceptually and intellectually interpreted objects of experience. The distinction between selective and interpretive awareness is extremely important. Concepts interpret what the outer senses have selectively introduced into awareness. The modern philosophers misrepresent the data of sense as ideas and therefore right from the start, mental construction enters into objectification. The quest for objectivity and the nominalist challenge. Objectivity is the existence of the realm of awareness wherein the other becomes manifest to the self, and even the self becomes an object to self. Deely explains, what is objective exists both as partially coincident with, while at the same time transcending the sensible aspects of the material surroundings, and as dependent throughout its full extent upon the action of science. Deely further asserts that all ideas give rise to relations at whose suprasubjective term are the signified objects, mere objects or objects which are also things, which the ideas are not. When we think of natural things, for example, a cat or a mango tree, and cultural items, for example, a flag, we are aware of the cat or tree or flag and not of the mental state as such. So also, when we are in the physical presence of something, for example, I am looking at a bike or listening to a close friend, the thing, in order to become present not merely in the physical world but also in our awareness, requires some factor within the observer on the basis of which the bike or the sound made by the person also exists as the terminus of our awareness of it. This intra-organismic factor on the basis of which the individual is aware of something is called the formal sign, the idea or the concept in semiotic terminology. It is precisely here that we run into difficulties with nominalism and its diverse manifestations in the modern period, inaugurated by Descartes and Locke. All relations in the nominalist view are products of our thought process, comparisons that a mind introduces when it sees reality. Thus, nothing is shared between the orders of ens reale and ens rationis. While in the order of ens reale, we constantly see individuals interacting, there are no supra-subjective relations over and above the subjects interacting here and now. Thus, Occam claimed relation to be no more than the name we give to a reality which has more than one subjective instance, such as several white things or several diseased jackfruit trees. Upon noticing the multiplicity, we form a relation among the multiples. Similarly, the early modern philosophers claimed that awareness terminates at images produced by the mind. Ideas are the only immediate objects of our sensory awareness. Since the whole of knowledge is based on mental self-representations, that is ideas, things in themselves are forever unknowable. If this be true, then we face the difficulty of proving that perceptions are connected with external objects. The other problem, even greater, is with regard to communication. If you have your ideas and I have mine, and each of us knows directly nothing but our own ideas, how is it possible for there to be a fruitful communication about a particular object? The public status of an object is therefore called into question. Earlier, Aquinas and Poinsot had clearly indicated that positing images as the basis for our awareness of objects in sensation is superfluous and counterproductive. At this level, we do not need to overcome a disproportion between the manner in which the object is apprehended and the way it is present in reality. Deely suggests that the right way to expose the folly of the modern view, the folly that external senses depend upon an image, is to pay attention to sensation precisely considered. Human reason provides sufficient ground to grasp that the activity of sensation terminates in the objectification of a thing existing independently of sense. Sensation precisely considered. The designation sense perception implies that sensations are generally considered to be simultaneous with perception. But analytically speaking, sensations are not only distinct from perception, they are also logically prior to perceptual interpretations. In human perception, a certain object is perceived as a mango, a computer, or a car, but in sensation only colors, shapes are presented. We notice here the disproportion between the apprehension of shapes, colors, etc., and seeing those same shapes as constituting a mango, a computer, or a car. To overcome the limitedness at the level of sensation, we need an interpretive activity, namely perception. Thus, when we speak of a semiotics of sensation, the challenge before us is to demonstrate how sensations are a web of naturally determined sign relations without involving in any way the mental other representations that precisely distinguish perception and understanding. In sensations, something of the external environment is forced upon my awareness. This partial objectification provides an awareness of objects as they are physically present here and now, acting on my sense organs. All the sense qualities, namely color, taste, etc., belong to the order of ens reale as relations brought about by causal interactions between the body of the sensing animal and the physical environment surrounding me. While sensation is in the cognitive organism, the sense qualities exist in between the two structures of subjectivity, the animal knowing and the environment known. Therefore, sense qualities belong to the interaction between the organism and the physical environment. From here, we may conclude that semiosis is already operative in giving to sensations a structure jointly determined by the physical nature of the foundation and the terminus of these relations of sensation. Deely draws our attention to a subtle but important point. The partial objectification in sensation is prior to any mediation by mental other representations. Besides being prior, it also serves as a basis for the further interpretive objectification that happens in animal and human knowing. Deely's demonstration of how the partial objectification of things in the world arises from sensation and not from ideas helps us to respond to the nominalist challenge and provides a sure footing for realism. The realm of objectivity begins at ens reale with the partial objectification of things. We now need to explain how signs are operative at this initial level of objectification. Let us recapitulate the distinction between proper and common sensibles, which helps us to understand how environmental things become partially objectified in sensation through the channels of sense. Proper sensibles are those aspects of the physical environment which impact the organism and are known through a single channel of sense. These include color, odor, taste, warm or cool, and sound. In contrast, common sensibles are those aspects of the physical environment that are assimilated through more than one channel, and these include shape, size, solidity, texture, sound, position, rest or motion, and number or plurality. While proper and common sensibles are known simultaneously, Deely claims that the latter are logically dependent on the former. The eye awakens to differentiation of light, and depending on it, the eye also sees shapes, movements and positions. When color, that is proper sensible, is seen along with shape, common sensible, the shape is not equal to the color. Instead, it is rightly seen as conjoined to the color and rendered visible through color. Neither the color nor the shape is seen separately. In the above mentioned case, there is no gradual passage from differentiated light to shapes and movement. Instead, there is a complex objectification created and sustained by sign relations among the sensibles. Together, the proper and common sensibles enable rudimentary objectification, wherein the organism gains initial awareness of its surroundings. The manner in which the common sensibles presuppose the proper sensibles fulfills the requirements of a mode of signification. This analysis of sensation in semiotic terms indicates that the whole of animal awareness is sustained by sign relations. The first level instrumental signs are intersubjective products of dyadic interaction between the organism and the environment. Due to this causal interaction, they exist wholly and as indirectly revealing the properties of matter on the side of environment, stimulating the sense organ vis-a-vis the properties of the material organ responding by giving rise to sensation. These relations reveal to the sensing organism shapes, movements and positions, that is common sensibles, of features of the environment. These common sensibles, as significates of proper sensibles, in turn become sign vehicles for the objective synthesis of sensation, on the basis of which the animal begins its interpretation of the surrounding. Subsumed into a triadic relation, the proper and common sensibles together become instrumental sign vehicles, even though they do not exist as material realities external to the organism. These first level instrumental signs are reducible neither to the organism sensing nor to the qualities existing in the environment. Hence, there are sign relations within sensation that are not products of the mind, even though the mind as an organ of apprehension depends further upon sign relations which the mind itself gives rise to. The dynamic nature of the mind in interpreting the sensations is discussed in the following section. The need of mental imagery and the role of signs within perception. The partial objectification of the immediate surroundings arrived at through sensation is not enough to meet the survival needs of the living organism, since the physical environment as such is indifferent to its needs. It then becomes the responsibility of the organism to fend for itself in the given situation. The organism has to therefore coat its sensations with interpretations not simply according to what is out there, but according to what the organism needs for its continuance. This interpretive activity in particular initiates the phase of perception. Let me explain with the help of an example related to the food needs of an animal. What the animal senses does not become food by being sensed, but by being eaten. Therefore, what is sensed must be evaluated by the organism as something to be sought. It is not what the object is in its subjective being that makes it food, because in its subjective being the thing may be grass or fruit or a piece of meat. Instead, it is what the organism makes of the object in its perceived being that makes the object be an item for nourishment. Nor could it be food if it were merely an object without subjective existence. To be food, the perceived object has to exist subjectively as well as objectively. Above all, the objectivity has to correspond to the subjectivity so that the animal can consume the food and nourish itself. In this interpretive activity, errors are possible and do happen. The animal may mistake something poisonous for food, and this harms its well-being or even leads to its total elimination. The search for food as well as the success, failure or mistake in finding it further proves that the objective world would not only includes but could be something beyond or other than what exists subjectively. Perception is an interpretive activity in which the animal, in response to sensory stimuli, creates its own species-specific objective world, also called Umwelt. It builds up on the activity of sensation by our contact with the physical world, so as to create the objective world with the help of rational relations. These relations of perception are the source of the first appearance of objects distinct from things. Deely claims that both ens reale and ens rationis make up the objective world of awareness. If objects were only sensed, the awareness would be restricted to a partial objectification of ens reale. However, objects sensed and perceived involve an element of ens rationis. Therefore, in perception, both ens reale and ens rationis come into play, without one displacing the other. While sensation and perception are alike inasmuch as they are tied to an awareness of bodies in their sensible aspects, what distinguishes perception from sensation is the presence of mental other representations. Mental images are superfluous and counterproductive within sensation precisely considered, but they are absolutely necessary in the interpretation of surroundings, wherein the organism makes attempts to make sense of the objects of sense as something favorable, something harmful or ignorable. The animal could have an initial awareness of a range of things in the environment, but to respond appropriately to these stimuli, interpretive representations from the side of the organism are necessary. For example, on seeing water, the deer moves towards it to quench its thirst, because the deer interprets water as life-promoting. Instead, on sensing a lion in the vicinity, the deer runs for its life because the lion is perceived to be something harmful for its survival. But the other herbivorous animals in the vicinity, the deer ignores, as their presence poses no threat to its existence. Deely clarifies that these representations are not self-representations but other representations. In response to the environmental stimuli, the organism forms mental representations that help it to make sense of the stimuli and to appropriately respond to it. As in the Latin doctrine of science, postmodern semiotics also identifies these other representations as formal signs. Animals make use of signs without knowing that there are signs. All objectivity is grounded in the action of signs, and signs presuppose the reality of relations. Therefore, animal objectivity is also grounded in relations, even though they are not aware of these relations. All objectivity, therefore, exists only in and through relations. While the animal manages to grasp the objects presented within sensory experience, the very relations that enhance this objectification are beyond its reach. This is mainly because the relations as such are not sense perceptible. In its cognitive activity, the animal forms mental other representations and engages in comparisons, which gives rise to mind-dependent objectivities. but the animal considers these mind-dependent aspects as if they are part of the physical being of the objects known. Other animals are not equipped to discriminate between what is added and what is adjacent. Only humans are capable. Therefore, when perception adds to relations of sensations, further mind-dependent relations, it does so without realizing that it is doing so. The animal cannot perceive relations. At most, it only knows the foundation and terminus. The animal is only capable of negations. Now, negations are the relations that result from the comparative activity of the mind. They are called negations because they are not what their compared subjective patterns are. All awareness, therefore, is based on sign relations. It begins with dyadic causal actions of sensible things upon our sense organs, but the moment the animal apprehends the stimulating source, it becomes triadic. Within sense perception, all the features whereby individuality is constituted objectively or recognized is directly accessible except for relations. Grasping the true nature and activity of sign relations is proper to human understanding. Let us now look at the uniqueness of human understanding. What distinguishes human understanding from animal perception is its ability to know things in themselves and, more importantly, the capacity to grasp the nature of sign relations, which makes knowledge possible. Let us begin by demonstrating the dependency of understanding on perception. Understanding depends on zoosemiosis. Deely claims that human understanding depends from the first instance on zoosemiosis. Our biological constitution determines what and in what ways our physical interaction with the material world becomes objectified. Sense perception provides understanding with a series of objective relations which lead to the constitution of the Lebenswelt, the human world. Without these objectifications, understanding would have no material to carry out its proper work of discrimination between appearance and reality. Even though human understanding has an action proper to it, which we will soon deal with, here it should be firmly noted that human understanding takes form in an intersemiosis with sense perception, not in contrast to it. Besides being grounded in sensations, both animal perception and human understanding manifest the need for mental imagery. In perception, mental imagery helps the organism to interpret the objects of sense as something to be sought, something to be avoided or safely ignored. In humans, simultaneous with perceptual interpretation, there is an intellectual interpretation whose function is to provide the human animal with some insight into the being proper to the object that is perceived. At both levels, that means perception as well as understanding, the mental representations are not self-representations but other representations, whereby a sensory element actively present here and now is interpreted with the help of psychological states that function as vehicles of signification and not as objects signified. The other representations could be considered as means to an end, not as ends in themselves. They lead us to the object signified. While it is true that animals form mind-dependent relations to find their way in the world, and that there is a web of relations linking animals not only to ens reale but to the larger whole of world of objects, not fully reducible to things, it needs to be noted that animals also have a sort of limitation. In his book, Purely Objective Reality, Deely sums up this limitation proper to animals, and I quote, "The animal as subject of sense perception is not even interested in the difference between objectivity as such and the independent being of things, whether or not partially manifested in objectivity. Not at all. The animal forms the relationships that it forms not for the purposes of speculative understanding, but for the purposes of survival and thrival. The animal wants to avoid mistakes, not for the sake of being right or seeing the truth, but for the sake of surviving and thriving. It has no disinterest in truth. It has no interest in truth. It neither knows nor cares how things are, but is concerned only with things being the way it wants them to be, and doing what has to be done to ensure that its interaction with perception come out the way it wants them to come out. It tries things not for the sake of truth, but for the sake of victory. Thus, the animal is more concerned with survival and thrival than with truth and right. The desire for truth and right falls within the domain of human understanding. Having briefly touched upon the ground common to perception and understanding and the limitedness of animal perception, we now investigate the uniqueness of human understanding, the uniqueness of anthroposemiosis. At this moment, it is appropriate to ask ourselves, in what way is human understanding distinct and superordinate to the powers of fantasiery? Aquinas claimed that one of the distinguishing features of understanding is its potential to recognize the difference between ens reale and ens rationis, to see the difference between that which is in the environment objectively, but also quite apart from sense perception, and that which is in the environment objectively, but not otherwise, yet without which the animal would never manage to satisfy its basic needs. Maritain, looking at the same question from a semiotic perspective, remarked, "Other animals make use of signs without realizing there are signs. Human beings not only make use of signs, but realize that they are signs." Deely, summing up the positions of Aquinas, Poinsot and Maritain, claims that the first achievement of humans is their ability to distinguish between things and objects. Related to this is another important point. The uniqueness of humans does not consist in the formation of mind-dependent relations, but in their ability to recognize the relations so formed as so formed, and more generally to recognize relations as such in their irreducibility to and distinctness from subjective being. Within human understanding, we can further distinguish two modes, the speculative and practical. Understanding is speculative when thought is used to objectify the subjectivities as such within objects, or to identify the intersubjectivities which obtain not only in the objective order, but more generally in the order of what obtains whether or not it is known, ens reale. Understanding becomes practical when it returns to the order of what is sense perceptible after having engaged in speculation in order to affect that order in line with the animal nature of the one conceiving. Speculative understanding is concerned with knowing what exists independently of human thought by asking, what is it? Practical understanding instead asks, what should be done? Both are operative in the human person. The speculative overflows towards the transformation of the human umwelt to promote the good of the human race. Unlike animals, human beings are interested in knowing the way things are beyond their appearances to our senses. The human capacity to know a whole range of things, not just objects that exist in the external world, that is ens reale, but also those that are known never to have existed except in myths and culture, is solely due to the peculiar nature of relation. I wish to note that even in humans, the awareness of relations is only inexplicit. Like other animals, human beings are also preoccupied with objects as related to their needs and therefore find it difficult to grasp the difference between things and objects, as well as in grasping the reality of relations. And even when the awareness of semiosis becomes explicit, it is usually slow and gradual. For most humans, the sign is restricted to some material object which draws their attention to something else. Only with effort we may realize that the very triadic relation connecting the material sign vehicle, the object signified, and the interpretant is the sign. The material object is merely a vehicle of signification which is able to perform its function only on the basis of the psychological states, also called as ideas, concepts, or formal signs. These imperceptible psychological states exist solely as sign vehicles that present within awareness objectivities that interpret the sensible world around us. Therefore, the action of signs is the basis of all objectivity, and it helps us to become aware of things in the world. However, objectivity is not to be limited to things alone, even though it begins in the order of ens reale. Human understanding restructures the objective world of animal perception by introducing into it new objective patterns which make accessible to human thought structures and beings which are entirely hidden to other biological species. Indeed, human beings surpass other animals in many ways. Humans are able to move beyond self-interest, inquiring into the nature of things apprehended apart from the biological interest. For example, we are interested not only in eating an apple to satisfy hunger, but also investigate the nutritional properties of the fruit. We not only take flight from venomous snakes, but engage into research on venom and how to treat snake bites. We succeed in objectifying certain features of the physical environment that exist but were not known. For example, the discovery of a new planet. We arrive at objectifications that are not accessible to any sense in principle. For example, the discourse on the existence of God and angels. In human culture, we see the objectification of creatures, events, and personages to promote a cause, identity, or ideology. For example, the figures of Ram and Sita, Arthur and the knights, Spider-Man, etc. Thus, the very possibility of myths, legends, philosophy, law, science, and all other elements that make human culture rests on an objective world specific to humans. The following section deals with our capacity to grasp the subjective being of objects and the role of signs in this process. So now we discuss the role of relations in the cognitive activity of humans. As stated earlier, one of the distinguishing features of the human being, in contrast to animals, is its ability to move beyond its biological interests to inquire into the subjective nature of things. The inquiry into the nature of objects is possible for a mind that is able to grasp relations as such in their difference from the terms related. Such a capacity alone can distinguish between objects that reduce to our experience of them and objects that give evidence of a hold on existence to which our experience only accommodates. Deely claims that all objective relations result from a comparative act of cognition. In a comparative act, the organism must form a mind-dependent relation, under which the object is seen in comparison to the external reality. Animals as well as humans share the same dynamism because objects are always presented in relation to the cognizing organism. No awareness, no object. Deely developing on Poinson's doctrine of science, makes further distinctions in the comparative act that gives rise to relations. The comparative act could be either discursive or compositive. In a discursive act, we compare one sensible act to another. In a compositive act, which is specific to humans, through a judgment, the knower separates the invisible to sense pure relation as such in its proper being from its sensible foundation and terminus. Further, within discursive comparison, we distinguish a twofold basis of discourse. One proceeds wholly on the basis of apprehension of what is directly sensible, the other proceeding from comparison of what is not directly sensible, that is, relations as such. This establishes the prior possibility of a compositive comparison. Therefore, discursive comparison is more fundamental than compositive comparison. The cognizing animal forms an objective being on the pattern of its experience of ens reale, even though the objective being formed does not belong to the order of ens reale. Therefore, this objective being is formed either on the basis of our experience of subjectivity or intersubjectivity, or a mixture of both. Ens rationis, that is being of reason, can be exhausted in two basic categories: negations and relations. Negations are relations patterned after subjective being. They exist only from a comparative cognitive activity undertaken in view of the directly sensible aspects of relations characterizing individuals as foundation and termini. They are called negations because they are not that to which they are compared, that is, substance and accidents. Instead, relations of the mind dependent nature are patterned after intersubjective being. They exist only in the cognitive activity undertaken in view of non-sensible aspects of relations existing suprasubjectively among individuals. They are called relations because they are what their exemplars are in the real world. The above discussion leads to some inescapable conclusions. Both negation and relation as ens rationis consist positively in being patterned after, and to be patterned after involves a relation between the patterned and the patterned. Therefore, the very possibility of ens rationis is determined by the fact that relation in its essence is the only mode of being that is not restricted to existing as such in the order of ens reale. The being of relation consists in its irreducibility to subjectivity. Whether it is intersubjectivity or not is totally circumstantial. One and the same cognized relation under one set of circumstances can be intersubjective as well as objective, and under a changed set of circumstances could become purely objective. This is because objective being cannot exist except in and through relations that are irreducibly suprasubjective. This point of arrival is very decisive for semiotics. To the question whether there can be correspondence between the objective and subjective orders, Deely responds affirmatively. There can be correspondence between thought and things precisely because thought, consisting essentially of science, consists essentially in relations, and relations are indifferent to the distinction and difference between ens reale and ens rationis. Every object is an object because it is the terminus of a cognitive relation, regardless of whether it further exists subjectively or intersubjectively as well. Therefore, every object in principle can exist as apprehended even when the subjectivity on which it once depended for its objective being no longer exists or was never physically present. The relation of self-referentiality or self-identity. The relation of self-identity at the level of human understanding is one of Deely's significant contributions to semiotics. Though the notion is not fully elaborated in his earlier works, a fairly detailed exposition is offered in Intentionality and Semiotics, published in the year 2007. He also calls it a relation of self-referentiality. While we accept the medieval proposition that the intellect knows universals, we also need to note that the intellect does not function independent of the senses, because human cognition has its origins in sensitive awareness, which is always of singulars existing in the physical world. Thus, in human knowing, the awareness of singulars is temporarily and logically prior to the awareness of universals. Deely elaborates, whereas other animals see the individualities of their environment only as objects in relation to themselves, human animals see these same individualities rather as kinds of things, subjects of existence, able to be investigated as such. Even though intellectual awareness is of individual things as of this or that kind, still the awareness of concrete individuals precedes and accompanies the awareness of kinds of things. To abstract a universal from a particular is to consider what is before us as some kind of thing in itself, rather than as an individual object represented through phantasms. Deely prefers to see abstraction not only as an operation of drawing something out, but also one that adds actual intelligibility to the phantasms. In Intentionality and Semiotics, he explains, the intellect is able to bring out what is already in the phantasms only after it has itself first added something to them, something that enables objects to appear not merely as life-promoting, life-threatening or inconsequential, but rather as objective beings, that is, things. Deely claims that the intellect actively adds to the objective world a self-referentiality by which the objects of experience are detached from exclusive reference to the knower. The objects are now viewed also prospectively as things existing or possibly existing in some, if not all aspects independently of the relation to the knower. At this level, it becomes possible, at least in principle, to sort out ens rationes from ens realia, socially constructed reality from natural reality. The agent intellect frees the phantasms from their relevance to the organism's needs according to its biological constitution, to further represent what those same objectified aspects are or might be, regardless of what the organism makes of them. For example, when the understanding constructs a mango tree and not a jackfruit tree, it positively gathers a focal congery of accidents as its starting point for recognizing the mango tree as a distinctive type of subjectivity. To the focal phantasm, mango tree, the intellect adds the formal relation of self-identity, which severs the object perceived by sense from an exclusive relation of life-promoting or life-threatening to the knower. This opens the way to the investigation of that presented subjectivity according to what it is essentially, that is, what makes it a distinct subjectivity in the order of ens reale. The relation of self-identity, of self-referentiality, is a relatio rationis, that is, a rational relation, because the mango tree simply is itself, not identical with itself. Through the relation of self-identity or self-referentiality, which is a rational relation, the objective world of animal interest is transformed into a world that can be investigated according to the structures that they have that make them things in their own right as well as objects. The phantasms of animal perception, so transformed, stimulate the human understanding to form further concepts which model things not according to how they appear to us, but as they might be regardless of the appearances. I wish to offer a few concluding remarks. In this presentation, attempts have been made to demonstrate that human beings have the capacity to know things in their essential structure as they exist independently of their relation to us. It is possible to arrive at knowledge of things in themselves when the investigation is properly guided. Our intellect is capable of abstracting certain essential commonalities from particulars, and these commonalities abstracted by the intellect become concepts, which in turn provide the ground for relations to particulars existing in the physical environment. Nominalism posed a big challenge to the Aristotelian realism by questioning the very reality of relations. The nominalists claimed that there are no relations in the physical world, and the relations we notice between things are imposed by our minds. They insisted that there exist only particulars, and words signifying commonalities are empty noises that signify nothing in the real world. The modern philosophers advanced along the nominalist path by insisting on our inability to bridge the gap between things as they appear to us and those same things as they exist in themselves. Kantian realism accepted the ontological position of the realist, that there are beings which exist independent of our cognition of them. But on the epistemological front, it lacked the confidence to claim that we can know these things in their essential structures. Kantian realists stated that we have to be contented with the knowledge of appearances, which are formed under the influence of things in the world. But the true reality behind these appearances is beyond our reach. Deely's semiotic proposal offers an alternative to the modern helplessness. His basic conviction is rooted in the primacy of the action of science, that science permeates the inner and the outer world as well as nature and culture. While all animals make use of science, the human alone is conscious of the action of science. We depend on science for everything, from our survival as animals to the highest forms of knowledge we are able to attain as human beings. We are also able to grasp the existence and the action of science because of the species-specific capacity to grasp relations existing between related things. It is for this reason that Deely defines the human being as a semiotic animal in contrast to the thinking thing of modernity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Banzelão. Thank you for being present here as well. This was a lecture today, enlightening lecture on a semiotic perspective of cognition. John Deely on the role of science in human knowing. This short lecture, comparatively with Deely's work, of course, has outlined what's likely to be Deely's most emphatic point on the uniqueness of anthroposemiosis based on his elaborated doctrine of supra-subjective relations. So, two guest commentators here today, Dr. Cristina Greco and Dr. John Hittinger. Thank you for being with us as well. We appreciate your presence today. They will be sharing their comments on this lecture, and we are eager to hear from them. And we'd first like to invite Dr. Cristina, and I guess a brief introduction on her bio is in order. Dr. Cristina Greco is an assistant professor of Semiotics and Communication, Vice Dean for Academic Affairs and Head of the Communication Research Unit at the Jeddah College Advertising. Jeddah College of Advertising, University of Business and Technology, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. She holds a PhD in Communication Sciences with a thesis in Semiotics of Culture at the Department of Communication and Social Research, Sapienza University of Rome. Her research interests include semiotics of culture, media and communication studies, visual culture, city identity, intelligent and emerging media, with a focus on the theories of collective memory and cultural identity. She was a guest lecturer at the university, actually this is, I guess, Spanish pronunciation, Universitat Politécnica de Valencia, based in Spain, as well as the Ghent University, based in Belgium. She has taught ethnographic analysis seminars and workshops at the Sapienza University of Rome, and she has as well taught semiotics of design at Dan Annunzio University of Chieti Pescara in Italy. Pardon my pronunciations. Her publications include Beyond the Myth, The Perfection of Being Imperfect Mother in Contemporary Advertising, published in 2022, Food, Heritage, Memory, and Cultural Identity in Saudi Arabia, The Case of Jeddah. This is co-authored with Bolero, published in 2021. Suspended Identity, the concept of ius soli among memory, boundary, and otherness, also published with Bolero in 2018. These are just a few mentions. For more details, you can refer to our website. And with this, Dr. Cristina, the floor is yours. We'd like to hear your views about Professor Banzelão presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Really appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this exceptional event in this such an amazing and important date for the great initiatives and for inviting me to be part of it. Allowing me to listen to even other, meetings to learn from all the excellent speakers and also exchange knowledge within this great scientific community. This is absolutely a great opportunity for all, and that we should even look forward and we hope so for next further actions in future. So I would also like to thank the lecturers, their commentators and chairs for the richness of the interventions, the visions shared between the past, the present, but also future of the semiotic studies that is coming from this diversity in perspectives and approaches. I would like to thank, of course, Professor Teixeira for his rich presentations. I really enjoyed reading his contribution and listening to it and reflecting on multiple aspects and points. Regarding this, I'd like to turn to your paper, Professor Teixeira, to start highlighting, first of all, some of the points that I went through while reading your contribution. First of all, one that is a basic as well as a fundamental component for semiotics that we need absolutely to, remind in our studies in semiotics, which is the relationships between cognitions and semiotics, to deepen reflect on the semiotics perspective towards cognition and the large contribution that John Deely has brought back to us in terms of understanding the process of knowledge and the role of science within it. Indeed, as Professor Teixeira highlighted, this can be outlined as the remarkable idea shared by Deely regarding the need of semiotics when it comes to understanding the process of cognition. I generally appreciate, for instance, that the straits put here on differentiation between the three levels of the process of awareness, which are, as he mentioned, sensation, perception, and understanding, and the role of interpretation within it, which led us to further reflections on the role of science between animal perceptions and human being understanding, considering that we are used to reflect on what is making us, that's why I was like, while I was listening to you, I was thinking even on this aspect that we are actually used to think about what is making us, different, but we are not so oriented in considering, in particular when it comes to these three levels, in reflecting what is making us closer. So thank you so much for highlighting in a very clear way this point. I also appreciate the ability of this intervention of building up a bridge between, how our daily lives and the semiotic proposal, which is also related to the conditions in which semiotics is presented, is is stressed for its importance within the academia. That I notice even, while teaching to my students, even students, they are not used to some considerations and some concepts. What is the importance of this kinds of reflection? What is the contribution, the real contribution of semiotics? So it's important to us also to understand that these kinds of approach in relating our daily lives, even the contemporary daily lives, to the semiotic proposal is what will enable us to relate, to visualize and formulate the meaning. For example, some important meanings that might be difficult in some cases to be understood, in particular from the new generation, between the meaning of presence in absence of. Then you shed further light on the another important distinction, which is the distinction between proper and common sensible, that you just mentioned. One is related to the impact that the organism has received through a single channel of sense, while the common sensible goes through a more articulated system in which, of course, more than one channel is involved. The other point I want to highlight, and it will lead then to some of my questions, is the part in which you talk about the uniqueness of anthroposemiosis, which is an important element, as you just mentioned, very important even for the Deely's reflection. So that with the human understanding, we distinguish these two modes, the speculative understanding and the way in which it's possible to think about the question itself, what is it, while the practical understanding, which is instead a reflection that leads us to the question, what should be done? And in this record, I'd like also to reflect on what you mentioned in your paper regarding the capability of the human beings and the interest in the human beings related to the process of knowing, which is the knowing the way things are, which is really related to our semiotic studies. And in this particular case, well, you also highlighted another point, that's the true, that the human beings is interested, is oriented in knowing the way things are, but in the same way, we have to recognize that as well, humans, they are actually worried about their needs. And this is actually even used in most of the some of the theories in communication science as well, which is related to the aspect in which the human beings even act or in relation and react in relation to their needs as well. So the other point that I wanted to highlight, always like following your journey, is the importance of reflecting on the primacy of the action of science, which is actually the aspect highlighted by Deely, which is that the science pervade the inner and the outer world, as well as nature and culture. And I liked even the way in which you went through this, like mentioning from the human culture, for example, the way in which human culture is built up, some myths, some legends, and the possibility for the humans to recognize something that actually is an objectification of events, characters that we are promoting, but actually are not are part of the identity of the ideology, which is very close to my studies when it comes, in particular, to our reflection on the way in which the different cultural contexts are able to construct, to build up a specific cultural identity that is very related to, of course, even myths and legend. So this is actually remind me even the work of Roland Barthes regarding mythologies, and in particular the idea of the myth, that the point that the myth cannot naturally occur, although the myth naturalize the concept, transforming them in something that is perceived as natural. But also to another idea, which is the idea developed by Yuri Lotman, which is the idea of semiosphere as a continuum in which there is a distinction between what is perceived as culture and what is perceived as not. So here, the basic concept that is highlighted, the concept is the physical and spatial concept of boundary, which is also one of the most important contribution that is able to define the cultural models, dividing the cultural space even here into inner and outer spaces. And of course, it depends on the points of view. Cultural, the other culture can be seen as non-culture and appear as another sphere, but without the same attribution that can be attributed to culture. So it can be recognized as something that is different, but in the same time, these two spheres need each other. And as well, of course, is related to the idea of cultures as a self-referential systems developed by Lotman. However, there are some mentions even from John Deely regarding the Lotman work and the Lotman contribution to these studies, but even in this case, even though I studied and I went through all the, all the works developed by Yuri Lotman, there is nothing, there is not so much in terms of the problem of semiotics, which is the beginning that you mentioned also of the relations, or that movement that is a movement between sign and non-sign, that we can recognize even there is something that goes over, that is beyond this distinction between nature and culture. So this actually is bringing me to the first question. And also I'd like to just move to how to say a current idea or a current application of the Deely's reflection to our times and what we are facing nowadays regarding some different aspects, for example, of digital age. So according to you, to what extent semiotics and the reflection on the role of science in human understanding and the process of knowing from a semiotics point of view can be responsible or enlarge the understanding of the relationship between nature and culture? In particular, I'd like to say, in a moment in which semiotics is asked to answer questions related to digital age and regarding specifically the relation between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. And if I may go just to the next question, this brings me to my next point, which is a question, of course, that do you see any applications of Deely's reflection today in a contemporary setting regarding the relation between nature and culture and between traditional and digital humanities? And if there is a space where we can look at to use it, for instance, in making sense of digital age and artificial intelligence-based communication, in order to bring the understanding of human capability also in this. So in particular, I want to just to highlight again one of the points that I found really interesting in your paper, in particular by highlighting this point, which is that humans form the relation for the purpose of, or with the purpose of, speculative understanding. Thank you so much. And Professor Teixeira, it was a pleasure for me to comment and reflect on your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cristina. Thank you very much. And I guess, Professor Banzelão, you are free to comment back to Dr. Cristina prior to inviting the second guest for the commentating. I think it's better if you relate to her right away.
Yes, Dr. Cristina, thank you very much for your response to my paper and for indicating a few points for further reflection. I must admit that the questions that you have raised are the questions that I need to explore, especially with regard to intelligence, of which I'm not very, it's not that I'm complete. I have some know-how of it, and reading as well as reflection to see how Deely's work would look at this whole dimension of artificial intelligence, taking his whole work. So on to you would be definitely out. I've not considered these points, and I assure you that in the future, either in my writings or to speak at further events for these international seminars, I would definitely consider the points that you have raised. But I'm truly grateful to you for helping me to look also into these new directions, which I had not considered while writing the paper. Artificial intelligence is definitely a huge area that I need to explore with the help of Deely. As of now, what I've read about artificial intelligence is without wanting to apply Deely into that, but I would need to look into it from that perspective. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, actually, yes, definitely. It's about further reflection, artificial intelligence, but in this case was even more regarding absolutely your paper and how your paper and the contribution you gave can be related to understanding the new relation between human, of course, and natural, what is considered natural intelligence towards artificial intelligence. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cristina. Thank you, Dr. Banzelão. We are honored to have here with us another guest speaker, Dr. John Hittinger, and he will also be giving his thought on the thought-provoking lecture by Dr. Banzelão. A few words of introduction for Dr. Hittinger. Dr. Hittinger, thank you for being with us. He is a professor of philosophy at the University of St. Thomas and the director of John Paul II Studies. He has published articles and presented papers on a variety of topics, including John Locke, Jacques Maritain, military ethics, liberal education, political philosophy, and the thought of John Paul II. Among other titles, Dr. Hittinger authored The Vocation of the Catholic Philosopher, from Maritain to John Paul II, and also the Liberty, Wisdom, and Grace, Thomism and Democratic Political Theory. Professor Hittinger worked with John Deely for many years while in the Center for Thomistic Studies, and he was the first speaker in the John Deely Jacques Maritain lecture series at St. Vincent College in 2018. Professor Hittinger, a special honor to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is my honor and delight to be part of this. I can say to Professor Teixeira, really, that is the best summary and explanation of Deely that I've read or heard. So that is no mean feat. You know, we all know Deely was just such a polymath, had such a grasp of the tradition. You have put into, I think, a great paper what we need to read to get oriented. And so you've raised all the issues in Deely, which would, give us a lot to work on. But I would like to focus on two issues. And let me say at the outset, and I think you'll see why I've given it this title. I'll give my little comments the title, The Confessions of a Neo-Thomist. And this has to do with Deely and the quo-quad fallacy, which is brought up on page 4. It's really quite central to Deely's teaching, as well as his contribution to Thomistic studies. And that's why, before I get going, I'd just like to briefly mention, not only is it the 5th year of the passing of our great friend and great philosopher, John Deely, but it also happens to be the 50th anniversary of the death of Jacques Maritain, who died in April 1973. There are many ways to characterize the greatness of John Deely and why we gather to explore his thought. One of them is, I would say he's the greatest heir of Jacques Maritain. I've been studying Maritain for 50 years. And, I know many of these scholars. Father Norris Clark is certainly one of the greats, but I think Deely certainly gets the mantle because we know he was one of the last ones to meet with Maritain. And that was just, I think, the passing of a baton that his destiny or providence gave him, I think, to really be the one who developed Maritain as Maritain developed others. Most of us are just taking Maritain and trying to understand him and pushing it forward. But Deely is truly one of these creative innovators like Maritain was. And there's certainly other reasons as well that we're here, and we know by his books. He also was a great Peirce scholar. His work with the semiotic, the beginnings of semiotics with Sebiach and others, Ponsois. I mean, he has many reasons that we want to study him. But my comments will be as I'll call it a converted neo-Thomist, and I'll explain that in a minute here. Well, let me get right to it. It is that John Deely formulates the idea of a quo-quad fallacy, and it's mentioned in many of his books. They're mentioned by Father Teixeira in his paper. It's really the root of the discovery of signs, right? Is that the idea is a formal sign, so that it's transparent, at least in a certain respect cognitively, that what is known is the thing as an object, the quad, and that the quad is the same in the thing and in my understanding. So Thomas Aquinas in question 85, article 2, talks about the key to understanding knowledge is that the idea is the id quo, that by which we understand. It's not the id quad or that which we understand. Now, again, Deely, we also know, was a man of great humor, great tenacity. He loved to provoke. And here's where the Confessions of a Neo-Thomist, working with him, I have to admit, he provoked me often by telling me the id quo distinction in Thomas is a fallacy. And I would always argue, no, it's not. Well, I'm a slow learner, I mean, now that he's passed and I've reread it, I see in a major respect, Deely is spot on. But I guess one of my questions will be here. I think fallacy is overstating it because there are core truths in this distinction. And in another book, and I'll mention which ones to look at in a minute, he calls it a blunder. I think it's better to identify it as a limitation if it's not done well. So who are the neo-Thomists? I would say if you have intentionality in semiotics and you want to see the humorous but argumentative on a good point, John Deely, he talks about the neo-Thomist in page 24, note 2. It's a long note, I'm not going to read it, but he takes all the great Thomists of the mid-20th century, including Maritain, and calls them neo-Thomist. It's a kind of put down in a way. I mean, Maritain said, I'm not a neo-Thomist. Deely says, look, it just means you've developed Thomas after Leo the 13th. But I think there is a kind of, let's just say, a provocation here about the Thomists, because he will say, well, let me read it, just a short passage on this, because I think it helps to explain the comments that I'm going to make. On the neo-Thomist approach to the problem of thing and object, this is page 35 of Intentionality and Semiotics. He said, we arrive at the famous quo-quad distinction of Franco-American neo-Thomism. Concepts are not that which id quod, not that which we know, but that by which we know things. And they imagine at a stroke that idealism is overcome and realism vindicated. But there's a problem here, not so fast. And he goes on to explain, one of his key points, that the notion of being includes the ens reale and ens rationis, and the neo-Thomists just want to get right to real being. So I see why he's a bit irritated that they've left something out here. And that's why I think he has a better job of saying it in his book, Descartes in Pensant, on page 55, he says, look, this permeates neo-Thomist thought, that this id quo, id quod distinction, here he says it's a simplification, it's an oversimplification, but I call it the fallacy. I've termed it that to the horror and resistance of my colleagues who have fallen victim to the oversimplicity of its charms. Well, that's me, and that's my confession. John, you're right. I fought with you for a number of years, and I'll just briefly say why I fought him, but why I think he is correct. He says back to intentionality and semiotics that it is it's an underreading of 85.2, and he says Maritain fell for this trap. So he's got a good critique of Maritain as he's launching the semiotic account. So I briefly say this. I think it's not a fallacy to the degree that indeed the main issue with the moderns, as Father explained in his paper, is the termination of intellectual judgment in the sign, in the image, that the way of ideas of Locke extends image all the way down through sensation, which leads Hume to say all we know are impressions, and we're locked forever, you see, in the mind. So I think it was right for Thomas to say, well, look at this distinction. This is what we've got to talk about. And Deely certainly agrees with that. Maritain also talked about the temptation to reify or crystallize the sign. And I think this is related also to Dr. Christina's comments about investigating culture, because Maritain was big on this, that these conventional signs have a grasp of reality, but they're not absolute or exclusive. And so that semiotics helps us step out of our culture or realize that reality is greater than our conceptualizing of it. That we are using an interpretation, that's again not to fall into relativism, but that there is some mismatch or some at least mystery still unknown in the thing. So I think this is part of the id quod. But okay, Deely says it's not a dyad, but a triad. And I think that's the great exploration. Certainly Maritain and others explored that, but many Thomists did become somewhat oblivious to the question of signs. So I would go to his formulation in Augustine in Point Sol. This is on page 99 of that. I think this is his best formulation. He says that, you see if I can find that one. He calls it a blunder rather than an error. This is it. He says, those who would restrict themselves to signs as they occur only within human control and consciousness, rational life, is a chimera, not to add a theoretical blunder of the first order, because species, specifically human linguistic communications, and semiosis strictly in the cultural world of nomos, to which language opens the way, could neither begin nor continue if the human use of signs were deprived of its constant draw upon semiosis more generally, or more generically, animal than human. So I think with that formulation, there is an id quo id quod blunder that those, at least from the Thomistic tradition, who become aware of signs, sort of stop at that one level of intellectual knowing and don't see this rich discovery of semiotics, which again, I think Professor Teixeira has explained so well, the network of the sensible world, that it's irreducible to either the subjective knower or the object itself. Again, that ens rationis, which is where culture comes out of, is equally fundamental to the being of nature, or the being of metaphysics. And so I think his reformulation finally, and then I'll wrap this up and have just one or two short points to make. His reformulation in Descartes and Prousseau on page 57 of the id quo, id quod distinction. See, here's I think this is where Deely shows he's such a careful thinker, that he's correcting the great Maritain, who was on an insight, but used that by which. And here's Deely's reformulation. Concepts are that on the basis of which we know objects, constructed and interpreted as this or that in the order of fact or fiction. I mean, that is a brilliant discovery, and really, or just formulation that I think bridges that gap between the medieval and the modern to open the way to semiotics. So one more little part of it is, he says that these concepts are formed on the basis of perceptions, ultimately from sensations, as revealing characteristics of bodies through the causal interactions of relations among proper and common sensibles. And again, this was very well explained. So Deely has a chapter in intentionality and semiotics called Terms Without Modern Equivalents. I would also point this out to you as how he has advanced Maritain and the Thomistic philosophy. There are terms like, it's often said species, but he even tells us how to pronounce it. It is specie, because there's no term like this in modern philosophy. And he calls it, it's the specifier. That's how a concept specifies what is brought into our awareness as something to understand. So again, I think I'm just trying to highlight Deely's greatness here. I won't repeat what you said about the origin of speculative reason, which again, I think is a brilliant recovery of the ancient idea of theoretical reason. And I would just end with one more question, if I may, and that is, Here's my other quarrel with Deely, and I'll just mention it and throw it over to Father Teixeira or any of you. He would often say to me, and he knew he would get the Thomas going, semiotics is the true first philosophy. Now, you know, the tradition says, I think for good reason, that metaphysics is first philosophy because it's about being. Now, Deely is just being provocative here because obviously semiotics helps us understand being is the first concept. We need to have semiotics to get metaphysics going. But I would say the first philosophy must still be once that is metaphysics, the study of being. See, Father, your paper ends as it should with Deely, that it's that self-referentiality and the law of identity properly understand that allows us to affirm what you could call the autonomy, or you use the terms distinct subjectivity of the other. This is important. But I think that's the basis upon which then there's a whole new realm of thought called metaphysics, where we do need terms from Aristotle and Thomas and others, such as subsistence, analogy, ens intentionality, which is another one that is that knowing is to be the other. I think these are some very rich ideas of ancient philosophy that got lost partly because the tradition got tangled in itself, as Locke and Descartes pointed out, made errors about modern science. And so there was this throwing of the baby out with the bathwater. I do see the achievement of Deely and semiotics generally, just like I think phenomenology as well, can help us recover lived experience, something about the world as we perceive it and live it in everyday life with concerns about what is real, about what is good, ultimately questions about God, that these are legitimate questions for the intellect to pursue. And I think semiotics gives us a sure footing in at least to start investigating things that since the time of Descartes have just been pushed to the background. So that's my remarks. Again, I thank all of you for listening, for inviting me, and particularly to our speaker for this very good presentation of Deely, which opens, again, the questions we ought to be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Hittinger. Thank you for your profound comments. And I'd like to open the floor for Professor Banzelão to reply back or to comment on some of your insights shared. Professor Banzelão, you are on mute.
Thank you. Professor John Hittinger, it's a great pleasure to see you and several others today, this evening. I've only heard about you, learned about the titles that you have written, and the first time that I'm hearing you with such lucidity about your own experiences or your own readings of Deely. To confirm what I've presented this evening. Thank you very much for what I've said. There are a couple of questions that I have and which I would like to raise, because I still lack a little clarity on certain points, and I wish to take advantage of your presence as well as the presence of Dr. Brian Kempel, whom I'm very glad to see this evening. In my own presentation, the relation of self-referentiality or self-identity is something that I do not have complete clarity about, and I'm not sure whether I've presented it properly, whether here or earlier in my earlier publication, because there is very limited matter that is available. As far as I remember, it is in intentionality and semiotics that Deely speaks about, in perhaps at greater length, but in all other places in passing. If someone could shed light on that, I would be grateful.
Well, I would defer
I
to
can
Dr.
try.
Kempel. Yeah, go ahead.
I can try, but I can promise no more than an attempt. As I recall, when I asked Dr. Deely about this myself, he gave one of his not atypical responses, which is, in short, figure it out yourself. After long consideration, however, and I came to realize that I believe what he means is that when he talks about the relation of self-identity, he's saying that we have recognized that the object is not just an object, but it is itself. That we have formulated in some degree of explicitness the proposition to ourselves that A is A, such that we're not recognizing A just as something beneficial, harmful, or neutral. We've made that advance to a recognition of the intelligible thinghood of the object as irreducible to those kinds of more animal umwelt circumscribed relations. If that, I hope that helps or clarifies.
That does help. Brian, Dr. Kempel was the last graduate student of Dr. Deely, and I took over, but I mean, it was all Deely and Kempel working this up, and he's written on a lot of these key issues. I would just add on that, Maritain uses the term transobjectivity. That is, it's the recognition that there's something beyond the object, which is a subject. And you mentioned that, Father, in your paper, that all that exists really are subjects. I mean, it gets to a doctrine of substance, subsistence, which I know not everybody will take that formulation, but I hope the recognition that there's a transobjective being or reality other than that which either, as you said, Brian, and the formulation does something to help me or hurt me, but has its own integrity, its own value, and so on, its own initiatives. I mean, human beings certainly they are actors, but other things in this world have initiative, right? That's why action and passion are key categories. So that's all I would add to it as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dr. John.
How about if I challenge you on that question? Could we take the word fallacy out of there? I'll ask you or Brian. Isn't it better to say it's a blunder, the id quo quod blunder? It looks like just a medieval distinction, but it's at the heart of semiotics, really, the heart of the meaning of a formal sign. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. So it's the blunder to just keep forging ahead as if you've solved the problem of modern epistemology with question 85, article 2 of Thomas. You guys know the syllogism of a mad Thomist. It's all in St. Thomas, and only I know St. Thomas. So watch out. See, we don't want to be mad Thomist here. But granted that, I think the core truth
I think if I can just very quickly to just say a word on that, I do think that to be provocative was always in John's nature. Point in fact, one of the last things he ever said to me was that I wish I had conducted myself with more tact, which was very telling. But I do think that fallacy might be a bit strong. I do think that you're right there. I have referred to it myself as the inadequacy of the quo quod distinction. And I think that even blunder at times maybe seems a little harsh, because certainly in the 13th century, making very explicit the nature of this distinction would have been, the necessity of it perhaps would not have emerged as clearly. You did not have that modern idealism having run amok. So for the neo-Thomists, perhaps it is a blunder. Perhaps the absence of the precise clarity and the distinction that one finds in St. Thomas, though I do think one finds it there, does perhaps simply come across as an inadequacy.
Good, thank you.
Well, I guess we are closing with this, our lecture. Dr. Banzelão, Dr. Hittinger, Dr. Brian, everyone, thank you so much. With this, I'd like to pass to our chair, Yulia. Yulia, please proceed with the closing ceremony. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elma. Thank you, Dr. Teixeira, Dr. Hittinger, and Dr. Greco for this lecture. Now we are moving forward to the celebratory part. I would like to congratulate everybody with the happy ending of our great scientific adventure, which is the International Open Seminar for Semiotics. Thank you very much. Nothing would be possible without the institutional support we get, without scientific advice, without active engagement of lecturer, of commentators, all the guests attending our sessions and participating in the discussions. It was an incredible experience, and it will be possible thanks to you. Now I would like to give a word to some of our guests who accompanied us during this year-long journey. And first, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Mario Santiago de Carvalho, Institute for Philosophical Studies, University of Coimbra. Dr. Carvalho, you are muted.
Thank you all. Congratulations. I'll be very brief, just 2 words. The first one, to congratulate everybody. This was an splendid initiative, and the Institute for Philosophical Studies is honored not only to have supported this initiative, but welcome you all. And the second word, and very brief word, but nonetheless heartily word, is to congratulate you all, but mainly 3, allow me this reference, 3 our members of the Institute for Philosophical Studies who have indeed supported this initiative throughout the year. Everybody knows them, but I would like to remember their names here. The members who are William Passarini, Yulia Nikitenko, and of course Robert Junqueira, who was the real cheerleader of all this initiative. Without him, this would be very, very difficult, or maybe impossible. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, the 3 members of the Institute for Philosophical Studies. It was really an honor to have this initiative and be part of this huge and highly scientific committee and all the persons involved. Thank you very much and congratulations. We hope to see you in another occasion within our in the further or future initiative of our institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Joseph Deshikis, Deely project.
Thanks, Yulia. I appreciate it. First of all, let me just extend the congratulations of Professor Farouk Saif, who cannot be with us live today, as we know. He did ask me to make sure to assure everyone that he is with us in spirit. And as the editor of Semiotics, which is the yearbook of the Semiotic Society of America, he will continue to do as much as he can to promote the academic legacy, the philosophy of John Deely. And I am certain that will be the case. Let me also mention that Brooke Deely also cannot be with us today. As you know, she was here at the opening ceremony with Bruno, the canine friend whom John Deely named to be his homilist at his funeral. I mean, should he die in the future, which he in fact did. And so Bruno is a very dear family member. Bruno had some troubles recently, medical troubles, but he came through surgery and he's doing well now. But as with all of us, he is aging and things are catching up with him. And lastly, well, before I move on from Bruno and Brooke, Brooke is just so grateful that you have all done this, that you have been doing this now for a year plus a day. And if we add the time of preparation before we began 365 days ago, it's even more hard work on the part of the organizers. So she could not be more pleased, and she thanks you all from the bottom of her heart. Lastly, let me just take a moment to express my personal gratitude, Yulia, to you, but also to William, Robert, especially. When this began, I was not sure where the locus of organization was. I saw Portugal, I saw Brazil, and I began to think of you guys as the Lusitanians. And oftentimes in my email, I would say, oh, the Lusitanians are doing such a good job, right? But I have such fond memories of having visited Coimbra in the past. And now I think of you guys as the Portuguese who sailed around the world to unite people from disparate parts of the globe. And that's essentially what you've done with this open seminar. You have called lots of people from various corners of the globe to be together for a year. And with this recorded legacy of lectures that you've created, the next generation will just have a treasure to explore, in addition to the various publications of John Deely and his commentators. So I personally, as director of the Deely Project, cannot thank you enough. And I know Brother Norman is going to say a few words as well about the physical resting place of John Deely and the physical collection that they have. But this could not have been a better tribute to John and his legacy. So thank you again from me personally as well. Thanks, Yulia.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to pass the word to Dr. Brother Norman Hibbs, also Deely Project. Please.
Thank you so much. My words will echo Joe's words of gratitude. Gratitude to John and Brooke Deely, who chose to come to St. Vincent and make St. Vincent their home, their academic community. Sadly, you all know that time was far too short. But through this presence of John, through the friendships that have developed, that I can say thank you to Joe for serving as director of the Deely Project at St. Vincent. Thanks to Robert and William and Julio for this organization of an extraordinary program, and all of the kind of scholars who have demonstrated this kind of extraordinary geographic reach throughout the world, as well as the kind of discipline diversity that John's work in semiotics has extended. St. Vincent is grateful to be part of this project, grateful that John rests here in our cemetery, grateful that his writings, many of his writings are in our library. We're happy that we will extend the lecture series that we began, that Professor Hittinger was one of our first speaker this coming April. Thomas Hibbs will be coming here and joining us to talk about Maritain on beauty, evil, and God. We are very thankful. God bless all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Dr. Donald Favreau, the National University of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Yulia. I'd also like to express my extreme appreciation for this incredible initiative. And I want to take a few words on behalf of the Biosemiotics community, in particular, to think of John today, to thank John, and to thank you for making John's work so available. If I may take just 2 or 3 minutes, I just want to share 2 quotes from John that more or less towards the beginning and more or less towards the end of his career that I think of really get a sense of the magnitude, the importance, the uniqueness of what he did and the way that John did it. So if I may, I would just like to share these 2 quotes. One is from the beginning with his work with Tom Sebiak, when they were writing a manifesto that Mardin, who's here, had a heavy hand in writing. And right in the beginning in 1984, it's important to remember that when they talked about the semiotics they were trying to develop, they said, we're calling for the development of a semiotics that will provide the human sciences, all the human sciences, with a context for reconceptualizing foundations and for moving along a path which avoids crashing into the philosophical roadblock thrown up by the forced choices between a naive realism and a naive idealism, as though this were the exclusive dichotomy or also exhaustive of the possibilities for interpreting experience. That was 1984. 25 years later, in purely objective reality, John begins the book by saying, the thesis of this book is that this established common usage of the terms object and subject with their derivatives is the outcome of 3 centuries of modern thought, wherein philosophy sought to distinguish so-called epistemology from ontology in order to show that the former alone could establish the foundations for human knowledge from purely within the knowing subject. We know for John, this is the great wrong turn of intellectual history. And as biosemioticians, our project is to, as Father Teixeira showed so well this evening, to show how at the fundament of knowing is ens reality, is real dyadic interactions in the world that become, through semiosis, through the transformations that are made into the formal sign, ways of understanding that can be animal understanding and human understanding. The 2 quotes talk about bringing together all sciences, hard sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, human sciences. And the educational system that most people have to go through today are still trying to keep those two vast areas of knowledge apart. With John Deely and with the resources that you've provided in this archive for this year, we now are able to show our students, here is how you can untangle this knot. Here is how you can transcend this forced choice between epistemology and ontology. This severing that Descartes started to put all the sciences on the side of what they consider ontology and all the humanities on the side of what they consider epistemology. The goal of biosemiotics, which John was fully supportive of, is to show how this cut is an artificial cut. There are distinctions, there are levels between human understanding and animal understanding, but understanding per se takes a common form in the sign. And with John's work, we can show students, we can give the most incredibly detailed, historically well-informed arguments for why it's now time to enter this new era, this postmodern era, where we can transcend that mistake and start understanding again how knowing and being are both part of life. It's hard to believe John's gone so many years now, but I think now more than ever, his ideas and his work will only grow in stature. It is absolutely central to the project of bringing together the humanities and the sciences and for helping us understand our place in nature. Thank you, John. And thank you again for this great initiative of the 50 or so videos that are available. I've probably seen half. I look forward to rewatching those over and over and seeing the others. You've done a great, great service with this. And I think that you should be very proud. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite now Dr. Brian Campbell.
Yes, thank you, Yulia and Robert and William and everyone who's been involved in this, particularly today and throughout the year. I have only a few words to share. But I suppose my reflection here begins in a way with the beginning of my experience working with John. No human being is born or reared without some inheritance, whether that be an inheritance of genes or family traditions, religion, culture, habit, belief, what have you. In the language of Heidegger, we are thrown, and that being thrown is not something of our choosing. But even when we do choose, our choices carry with them consequences that escape our awareness in the moment of choosing. And today, at the end of this year-long endeavor, I'm acutely aware of how I have been thrown. The first time I recall actually hearing John Deely's name, I had just been accepted into the graduate program in philosophy at the University of St. Thomas. I was visiting an undergraduate professor discussing my future in the program. That professor said that if I could get past John's attempts to shock me, that I could learn an awful lot from him. And I don't think the professor necessarily intended this as advice, but I took it as advice nonetheless. And I'm sure glad that I did, because he certainly did try to shock me, as he did everyone else upon meeting them, it seemed. But I was able to get past that and get to know him. And I'm so grateful that I did. I had chosen to go to the University of St. Thomas, but in so choosing, I did not know then that I would be choosing to write my dissertation with John. One led, however, almost seemingly inevitably to the other. Taking a course with John in the second semester of my time there was required, and his teaching style was unique to my experience, to say the least. But he caught my attention with an offhand comment about how the only book-length treatment of which he knew that undertook to examine Thomas Aquinas's comment that being is the first object of the intellect was Heidegger's Sein und Zeit. I was thrown, but I was also caught by this comment, having struggled to grasp precisely what it was that Heidegger was getting after in that marvelous work. And being so thrown, I am now, as I believe we all are, inexpressibly grateful for having been caught up in this particular inheritance. At the end of this year, I think we've all come to know John a little bit better than we did before. And to have inherited more of his spirit shared amongst us, and the traditions which he attempted to convey, not as calcified relics, but as living intellectual vitality. His ardent desire for the truth, for getting it right, no matter how long that takes or how many hours you have to spend bent over a book or a computer or whatever it may be. for uncovering what is and what may be, and what we mean also to one another. To see this living hero among this emerging community of inquirers, I think nothing could be more in the spirit of John, unless we had perhaps a few more bad puns invoked every so often. But on behalf of myself and the Lyceum Institute, I really do want to say thank you so much to everyone for doing this, for being involved in this, all of our contributors and participants, and most especially those who have done so very much work to organize and facilitate these sessions, ensuring that John's thought receives not only its due recognition for its brilliance, but that it exercises an influence upon the developing thought of others is important to me personally, but I think quite important for the world. And so let's all continue trying to make John better understood, trying to understand John better ourselves, and keep building what we've started here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. I would like to invite now Dr. Olga Lavrenova, International Association for Semiotics of Space and Time.
Dear colleagues, dear organizers, I'm very happy to be a participant of this very great project. It is a great honor for me. This project turned out to be very interesting and useful for everybody who interested in semiotica and John Deely heritage. And it was listened in all parts of the world. He related many interesting aspects of John Deely's scientific heritage and new aspects of semiotic as such, as it is. I hope that these records will remain in the internet for a long time. I am very hopeful that, and that these records can be used by all interested researchers in years ago, in the years ahead. I studied the bibliography of John Deely, and I did not find any translation into Russian. And of course, now it is not the best time for international cooperation in Russia in scientific questions also, but I hope that it will be possible in the future, maybe in the nearest future, and I suggested Yulia to think about that. Many thanks for all organizers to do that very great project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Now I would like to invite Dr. Inna Merkulova, International Center for Semiotics and Intercultural Dialogue, State Academic University for the Humanities, Moscow.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to attend the closing ceremony of the John Deely project. I remember that the project was launched exactly a year ago on the same day, on January 7th. It was a great honor and joy for me to participate in the opening ceremony, and then at the end of January to present my research in a lecture dedicated to Algirdas Julian Gremas and Lev Karsavin. Throughout this year, I regularly listened to lectures by my semiotic colleagues as part of the project on YouTube, once a month or more often. Finally, the beginning of 2023 became a kind of culmination of the project when, from January 3rd to 7th, we had the opportunity to listen to as many as 5 lectures. These days, I learned a lot from the lectures of our esteemed colleagues, Eero Terasti and Susan Petrilli, took a lot of notes, and I'm going to listen to these unique recordings again. I think that this project of the International Open Seminar on Semiotics dedicated to John Deely is a very important step for the preservation and promotion of his scientific heritage. Moreover, in view of such a large-scale geography of the seminar participants, semioticians from dozens of countries and many continents, the project became not just an exciting journey into the world of semiotic and philosophical ideas and questions. I would put it this way. Within the framework of this project, we have taken an important step toward the creation of the intangible semiotic heritage. As you know, UNESCO officially introduced the term intangible cultural heritage in 2003. It is also called living heritage because it includes customs, forms of representations and expression, knowledge and skills passed down from generation to generation. Intangible cultural heritage, as written in the UNESCO Convention, creates a sense of identity and continuity among communities, promotes creativity, and contributes to environmental management. The videos collected in the John Deely project serve the same purpose: to create a sense of continuity among the international semiotic community, as well as to encourage new ideas and creativity in the field of our discipline. At the same time, a key role is assigned to new forms of communication, which have become especially active over the past 2 to 3 years. I'm talking about virtual communication. I would like to once again sincerely thank all the organizers and participants of this project for the great and excellent work they have done. And I would like to conclude with the words of John Deely, with his voice, which has been heard so often in video lectures this year, in the form of quotations, allusions, interpretations. As long as the voice is heard, as long as we read and discuss the texts of the founders of our discipline, their legacy remains alive and relevant. These are Deely's words about the postmodern era from his article, What Semiotics Is, 2015. The postmodern era of intellectual culture, the era where it comes to be understood that the action of science, semiosis, provides the framework for the whole of human knowledge, from its animal origins in sensation to its farthest reaches beyond the material world in the contemplation of spiritual dimensions within the physical order of being as independent of awareness by finite mind. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I would like to address heartfelt thanks and to all the speakers and for your kind words and for your engagement. And I would like also to invite our guests present here, if they want to have a few words. I see here Dr. Kaliku, Dr. Nerdine Anderson, Dr. Jar Hoja, who were with us for so many time, for such a long time.
May I say just 2 words?
Please, Professor.
just to thank you, all of you, for this brilliant seminar, and for inviting also a beginner, an ignorant like myself, but not one time, 3 times. And that was an excellent possibility for me to learn a lot of more about John Deely. According to that, what I have read before, it was, of course, a ground for our basic academic development. Secondly, one of the biggest masters of semiotics, as we regard him now, Deely, is not only relevant for what he has contributed, but for the overall historical development of semiotics, especially with his capital works. Not only regards the philosophical thought, also all the turns or approaches, as we name so in semiotics. I've myself started from linguistics, from structural semiotics. In Deely, we can see even that. In Deely, we can see the Middle Ages philosophy. We can see the basic developments of ontology, then spreading into epistemology, even the so developed and biosemiotics nowadays, parts of our subjective movements, the objectivity which we find in the rest of the world, besides the human being, their activeness and the permanent movement and activity of science. My impression is that this event has contributed to the overall academic advancement of semiotics, and in uniting the natural sciences and the humanistic sciences, but also the artistic field, and have learned so much of it out of so many masters of semiotics, which I think we must still learn. And in the future, these events must be repeated so that new generations get familiar with a science which now is becoming omnipresent in each and every life sphere. So thank you so very much once again, and I'm here for future collaboration like everybody is. Thank you.
Thank you. And before inviting Dr. Merdine Andersen, I would like also to announce that we are going to have a communication from Dr. Paul Cobley as well today. So please be patient, and I'm giving the word to Dr. Merdine Andersen.
Yes, 2 words. Thank you. It was a truly astonishing experience to find so many voices from so many parts of the world, and not strictly from John's original ideas, but we still have a healthy heterogeneity within the semiotics community. And I know with this as a resource, it will continue to fertilize the field. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Also 2 words.
Please.
Thank you, all the organizers of this great event, great series of seminars. But I would like just to say how good feeling it is to be a part of all this community who shares the belief, John's belief in semiotics, into semiotics. So there are so many of us who now are sharing John's project, and that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, if I think we may proceed to Dr. Cobley's presentation.
Wanting to speak. Professor Washik would have a word.
Yes, if you allow me, as an external observer of all lectures which were relevant for me, I may say that I had the opportunity to meet John Deely in the during the summer school of 1983, and I remember Maritain Andersen at that time. She was co-working with Deely and other persons preparing manifesto for semiotics, for the new understanding of semiotics where all organism to place. And of course, during the lecture of Eero Tarasti, he mentioned also that occasion because he was there present too, also a year before. I spent in Bloomington, Indiana at that time 17 months in the research center for language and semiotics with Tom Seabrook. So then thank you very much for organizing such an event. And I have learned a lot from lectures that were relevant for my works in semiotics too. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm greeting also all of my friends and colleagues whom we know from previous enterprises in semiotics.
Thank you very much for your address. If there's no one else willing to have a word, we will pass to Dr. Paul Cobley.
Dr. Cobley, sure.
As this international open seminar comes to some kind of conclusion, I would first of all like to respond by thanking the organisers for what has been an excellent series, wide-ranging, representing the breadth of John Deely's interests, sphere of engagement, and his entire achievement. But I should also mention that they haven't just represented all of these things, but also organised with utmost efficiency, uniting scholars and overcoming the potential pitfalls of the online medium while exploiting all its benefits. As a contribution to the conclusion, I would like to just say something about an incident that I had with John Deely 20 odd years ago. I often talk to John, obviously, about issues in his work, in particular things like relation in the sign, the idea of the subjectivity, objectivity couplet, physiosemiosis quite often. But I talked to him on one occasion about my plans to implement in a future paper his sign, object, thing distinction. And I wanted to do that implementation in a particular way. I should stress that it was nothing so crass as applying Deely. You know, that idea of applications is fairly redundant, but I was going to implement his paper in a way which was relatively practical, you know, that the distinction would be employed in a way which would have a particular outcome. I noticed that he was very animated about this and insisted on providing me with extra materials for my task, as well as engaging in dialogue about the forthcoming paper. So when I reflect on the International Open Seminar, of course, it's wonderful to have scholars notice your work, even after death. You know, that prospect to know that your work will live on, I think it must be very comforting to a lot of us. But for scholars to implement John's work in the way that this seminar series has presented, implementing the work in the way that I've just described, I think that would have been exactly as he wished. As such, then, it's difficult to imagine a more fitting tribute to Deely's work. I see this International Open Seminar as remaining open, even though we're talking about some kind of conclusion now. That's to say, with reference to one of Deely's most important books, that the International Open Seminar has been a new beginning. And I give thanks to our colleagues, everyone who presented, but particularly the organisers of this entire series, which has been, as I say, the best possible tribute that we could have given to John Deely in the circumstances.
To conclude, I would like to invite now to speak our dear colleague William Passarini, also representing Mansarda Acesa project.
Yeah. Hello, dear professors and audience. First, I will start by asking for your patience because as a member of the organizing committee, I have to share with you some statistical data and give thanks to everybody who made this event possible. Robert, could you share that PowerPoint, please? It will take a few minutes, so that's why I ask for patience, but it is absolutely important to thank everybody. So we can go to the next slide, please. So first of all, the IO2S Deely brought together more than 100 personalities who either provided us with brilliant lectures and commentaries or supported us with organizational issues or heartedly chaired the sessions. All personalities involved come literally from all over the world. You can see the name of all the countries in the PowerPoint. We express our deepest gratitude to all of you who trusted in us and supported this event in honor of John Deely. I'm sure he is grateful to you. We can go to the next slide. I do not know if you remember, but this event did not start in 2022, but in 2021 with two preliminary events, two interviews that Tim Trotman and I conducted with Dr. Brian Campbell and Dr. Farouk Seif, all of course with the support of Robert Junqueira. And both interviews are recorded on YouTube, and each one got more than 1,000 views. The next slide, please. Exactly 1 year ago, we had our opening ceremony, in which, besides the presence of all great professors, we counted on the participation of Dr. Brooke Williams. And since then, we have had over 52 weeks of gatherings, full of insightful discussions. The next one, please. As you already know, the seminars were divided into two modules, a historical module and a systematic module. And putting all seminars together, we have had over 60 lectures, followed by an equal number of group discussions. Almost all these lectures are published online in open access for the prospective benefit of the whole community, along with the comprehensive critical apparatus in both our homepage and our auditorium, both of which are still being completed and will be soon available in a definitive version. And you can also access the lectures by the YouTube channel of the Institute for Philosophical Studies. Our auditorium is now going to be given the final touch, such as adding some further readings we have already received and some we are yet to collect. Afterwards, it will be already like a beautiful garden full of for all the semiotic bees to be able to buzz around and pollinate our flowers. We can go to the next one. I also take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee, which is formed by 21 individuals coming from Albania, Argentina, Brazil, Egypt, Iran, Japan, Portugal, Russia, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, and Venezuela. They are members affiliated with 12 institutions either of charity, research, or higher education, of public trust or private ownership, either of regional or international dimension. I cannot help but express my gratitude to the Scientific Council and extend it to all the lecturers and commentators whose effort, research, and wisdom are making a great contribution to semiotics in our current age and in the future.
Saudi Arabia, United States and Venezuela. Mało tych krajów było organizatorów. Także skąd oni mieli cały świat ogarnąć? Z Polski nikogo nie było.
You can proceed, William. I'm sorry. The person is muted.
Okay. Our utmost gratitude goes to the board of institutions, many of them being international in nature. The 17 organizations that make up the board of institutions of the IO2S Deely have their headquarters or were established in Brazil, Denmark, France, Iran, Portugal, Russia, Switzerland, and the United States of America. As a matter of respect, I will list all the institutions by name. The Institute for Philosophical Studies of the University of Coimbra, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of the University of Coimbra, the Lyceum Institute, the Deely Project, the St. Vincent College and Seminar, the Iranian Society for Phenomenology, the Iranian Political Science Association, the International Association for Semiotics of Space and Time, the Institute for Scientific Information on Social Sciences, the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Semiotic Society of America, the American Maritain Association, the International Association for Semiotic Studies, and here I take the opportunity to personally thank Dr. Nacho Segal, the Vice Secretary General of the IASS, for his tireless commitment over the course of our joint venture. The International Society for Biosemiotic Studies, the International Center for Semiotics and Intercultural Dialogue, Moscow State Academic University for the Humanities, and the Mansarda Acesa. For the institutional framework that enabled the planning of the IO2S Deely, another word of appreciation goes to the Foundation for Science and Technology of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education of the Government of Portugal. We can go to the next slide. I cannot forget the efforts of our chairs, who brilliantly hosted each session, and besides that, also enriched this event with ideas and suggestions. Therefore, we express our gratitude to Elma Berisha, Tim Trotman, and Yulia Nikitenko. We can go to the next slide. I also extend my word of gratitude to Zara Soltani, our designer, who was so kindly in charge of these beautiful images designed for advertising the lectures. The next slide, please. A heartfelt and lasting token of gratitude goes to Professor Dr. Mario Santiago de Carvalho for his role in formalizing the authorization for the beginning of our organizing activities in May 2021. Before finishing my words, because I have a breaking news, but before telling you the breaking news, I would like to say very clearly that this event, I didn't tell Robert about this because I think he would say that for me to not tell, but this event wouldn't be possible without the help, the ideas, the organization, the support, everything. This event wouldn't be possible without Robert Junqueira and Yulia Nikitenko. So I think everybody has to be thankful to Robert Junqueira and Yulia Nikitenko. I'll send my virtual claps. So thank you very much, Robert and Yulia Nikitenko. Really, this event wouldn't be possible without them. But now we can go to the next slide, the image of John Deely, because I have a breaking news. I think you won't believe me, but it's absolutely true. Everybody here, I think, watched the imaginary dialogue that Dr. Farouk Saif had with John Deely. He had this dialogue, but John Deely was already dead. How is it possible? It is possible because Dr. Farouk Saif has access to the secret phone number of John Deely in heaven. And Dr. Farouk kindly sent us his phone number. And we were able to talk verbally to John Deely yesterday. John Deely is in heaven, very busy, talking to Thomas Aquinas and John of St. Thomas. But he took a time and talked very briefly to us. He asked us to be sure to thank everyone on an individual note. And we told him that there was not enough time to name all of you. So he told us we should at least say hello to Brooke Williams, his beloved wife, and also his dog, Bruno. So I think John Deely is related to us for the rest of our lives and perhaps for a longer time after our death, if it's possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. On my behalf, I would like to also to thank everybody, Elma, Robert, William. Without you all, it won't be possible.
May I have a word, Yulia and William, just to say something very important, because nobody said this, and this should be said, which is something that John Deely had or got, and that any person who writes would really appreciate to have, though hardly anybody has, is a reader like William Passarini. So let there be many more John Deelys and William Passarinis in the future. It was, have no doubts, none of you, no doubts that it was Passarini's high regard for John Deely that powered this whole series of events that from now on we are looking at retrospectively.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. If there is nobody else willing to take the word, I would propose to close our closing ceremony. And thank you very much for this coming through.